Good morning and welcome to the February 19th Women's Legislative Roundtable of the League of Women Voters of Virginia. This is our final WLRT for this session. And as usual, this is a virtual wrap-up, and you will be hearing from our issue group leaders. We have an action-packed agenda. We have a lot of issue groups. They're going to have at a maximum about 8 minutes, knowing that voting in elections has the bulk of our bills for obvious reasons. So we will probably have zero time for questions. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Some people will try to answer them as someone else is speaking. If that's not possible, we will make sure that the people get your questions, because we know where these people live. We can track them down and get your questions answered. Before we do start, I do want to say that if you have not responded to the League of Women Voters Save Act requests, where there have been many action alerts, Christine Payne reminded me before we started that the Save Act did pass the House last night. This is the one that will require people to have either a birth certificate or a driver's license or passport with your correct name on it. So if you are a woman who happened to get married or divorced and changed your name, or if you don't have these things to register to vote, you will be disenfranchised. So if you have not responded, if you have not called your senators, do so today to make sure that you put as much pressure as possible to not have this pass the Senate. So with that, we're going to go alphabetically. Our first speaker, therefore, would be Alice Toussignon. Alice wears two hats. She's our program director on the state board, and she's also the chair of the Affordable Housing Issue Group. I will drop again in chat the information where you can find the information, but I will turn the floor over to Alice. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. As Joan said, I'm the chair of the League's State Affordable Housing Committee. And all in all, we have good news, I think. We were prioritizing 3 budget amendments and 4 housing bills. Of course, there were many, many more than that, but we just picked the ones that we thought were really important and hopefully would not get vetoed by the governor. So in terms of the budget amendments, the only one, well, of course, we don't know about the budget yet, but the point is if you're included in either the House or the Senate, then most likely you will get some money. And unfortunately, the only one that was not included was the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. But the good news is that has a base funding of 87.5 million. And in case you don't know, 80% of that is used to preserve and create new affordable housing, and 20% of that is used for homeless services to keep people off the streets and get them rapidly housed. The second budget amendment, where money was included in I think it was the House, is the 5,000 Families Program. This is a new pilot program where we were asking for 80 million to help 5,000 families with children, with school-aged children, maintain and get into stable housing. Well, $80 million is a lot of money, but 15 million was included, and we're hoping that that program will start. That is a 3-year pilot, and it is basically rental assistance for these families. The third budget amendment was for additional money for the Virginia Eviction Reduction Program, which now has a base funding of about a little over $3 million. We were asking for another 3 million. And unfortunately, but maybe fortunately, 500,000 was included in the Senate budget. So we're hoping that that stays in at least at 500,000. to bring the funding up to about 4 million base budget. In terms of the 4 housing bills, I do have to make a correction. If you looked at what we had in the drive, the good news is all of the bills that we were supporting did pass both houses. 2 of the bills, I thought all of them were bipartisan support, but only 2 of the bills were. And the 2 that were bipartisan support and hopefully will not get vetoed by the governor are the ones, are the real estate anti-bias training, which was patroned by Delegate Askew. And that's an important bill because right now there is a lot of bias in terms of especially Black families, homeowners, and in terms of their homes being appraised lower than white homeowners. And so real estate appraisers will be required to take anti-discrimination training as part of certification. And then the other bill that had received bipartisan support was HB 2218, was about forms of rental payments. And that will mean that renters will have the ability not to pay their rent without getting fees charged, because they've added a sentence in the landlord-tenant policies that will require there to be at least one option for tenants to be able to pay rent without, having a fee charged to them. The other two that we were supporting were the HB, let me see if I get this right. HB, let's see. That was the Preservation of Affordable Housing, HB 1973, sponsored by Delegate Bennett Parker. And that was passed by both the House and the Senate, but it did not get bipartisan support. And what that bill is going to do, or was going to do, because it probably will get vetoed, was to say that multifamily housing that received public support and had an affordability period, when that affordability period expired, nonprofits and local governments were going to have the right of first refusal in the hopes of keeping it affordable in perpetuity. The last bill I wanted to talk about was the Faith in Housing, sponsored by Delegate Carr, HB 2153. That bill, which we hope to have nonpartisan support and came out of the committee with bipartisan support, did not. But what that does is it gives, and it was changed to nonprofits in housing, including faith-based nonprofits, is going to give incentives to localities to make it easier for nonprofits and faith-based organizations to develop housing on their properties. So that's mostly good news. We're not unhappy about this, and we'll see what happens when the budget comes out and once the governor gets his red pen out. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. We appreciate that and all your work on that committee. Our next speaker is with the Child Care Issue Group, Maria Posey. By the way, I'm not pinning anybody. Is that okay? It's 8:30 in the morning. We're all family. Are we okay with that? Okay, great. It's fine. So Maria, you have the floor. Maria?
Okay, can I go? I'm here, but can someone else go first? I just need a few more minutes to prepare. Is that okay?
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I know you have little kids. All right, we're going to go to the Education committee, and it would be Denise Harrington, who is our advocacy chair. So Denise,
Thank
you've
you.
got the.
I'm going to go real quickly. Thank you all so much. A lot of you have been following what's happening. So many of you know that last year we had the JLARC study that basically says what our education equity study group said, that the state of Virginia is not fully funding our children, basically in public schools. So what happened is they came up with a lot of money and bills and things last year, and a lot of things were either vetoed or really they didn't deal with it. So this year, they made it a point. Speaker Don Scott did a what do you call podcast, and he was talking about we're going to make sure that we start implementing some of these JLARC recommendations and near-term recommendations. And again, this almost coincides with what the league's equity group study talked about. Was really, it's inequitable. So there are a lot of things happening. And so I'm going to go real fast. So we had about 5 priorities. The number one priority, and this is, again, it came from our study, but also our coalition, Fund Our Schools, is priority 1 was the state paying its fair share. So one of the things we talked about, and a lot of you remember this, the local option, 1% sales tax allows localities to have a referendum if they would like to utilize 1% sales tax just for school construction. And last year there were 8 localities asking, so they put them all in one bill, and of course it was vetoed. So this time, what we're finding is instead of a lot of bills that could be vetoed, they were put in budget amendments. And then I'll send out a separate document. I'll put that in the chat later on. But I just wanted to say, one of the things you have in your drive is information about the budget amendments. And then there's another part to state paying its fair share, the JLARC study funding for K-12. Again, we got very concerned when Sam Rasul, who chairs the education committee in the House, we got very concerned when his bill was passed by indefinitely. That was HB 1954 on February 11. And we got very concerned and we had this meeting, what's going on? And he said, well, guess what? We're going to put stuff in budget amendments because right now the conferees are working on this. So it was better. So everybody calm down, and we do have a lot of that. Now, priority 2, it was funding for students facing the highest barriers. And of course, when we didn't see a bill, we had one bill, and we saw this bill get immediately sent to Senate Finance. And we said, what's going on? Because it seems like the money committees is where a lot of bills went to die, and they killed it. And so we were like, oh my gosh, there's no additional funding because we have a new accountability system in public education now. So when that happened, we found out this is what they're doing, is they're divvying it up in the budget amendment. So priority 3, school-based mental health. In your drive, you'll see the whole history of that. And Senator Favola's bills, SB 768, and the House complementary to that was HB 1947. That was Seabolt's bill. All those bills passed, and then there's some more things about mental health, and you can check that out in the drive. So moving on, so we're good, and there is money, there's budget language too for school-based mental health. Priority 4, support school models and systems that support community involvement. Basically, more funding for community schools. Those of you who live in Roanoke area, Delegate Sam Rasul, who chairs the House, he's so proud of his school. He said he's gone in there, he's seen the dental chair and all these other kinds of things, but there's money in the budget, and that's in your drive with it is. And the last one was our priority for what is referred to as safe and restorative schools, the pilot program. That was HB 2196, Dolores McQuinn, and Senate bill equivalent was, those of you who live in Fairfax, Senator Prakarsky, SB 1262. And at the very last minute, they killed these bills. And so next year, the Fund Our Schools Coalition is going to create, bring in the principals organizations. I gave 2 examples, and this is in your drive, of what they're voting against, like a classroom management strategy a lot of people are using, positive behavior intervention supports, and a whole lot of other education jargon and things like that. So you have a history, a little bit of those bills, and I put that in. But for the most part, I'm going to put in the chat something that has all the budget ask that the Fund Our Schools Coalition is doing. And you have that, a little bit of that on this paper, but we're very encouraged. And the conferees are working right now. So there will be much more funding for public education and for these vital services. And that's it. If you have any questions, you can just email me or something like that. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you. Now we're going to go to.
I'm ready.
You ready? All right, then we'll
Ready.
go. All right, childcare and Posey. Thanks, Maria.
All right. Thanks, guys. Sorry for the juggle here this morning. It's always a little tricky to get it all together, but so we were tracking a number of bills and budget amendments with the primary goal to clear the wait list, because you may remember from last year, we got a historic investment in the state taking over the vast the vast majority of the child care subsidy fund, because what the state gets from the child care development block grant is a fraction of what the need is, and they had been using ARPA funds to expand eligibility and meet what they call the family demand for subsidized child care, which, surprise surprise, is really significant, especially once they expanded eligibility to up to 85% of state median wage, which is, for those of you who track benefit programs, it's about 350%, between 250 and 300% of federal poverty. So it reaches families that would normally not qualify for public assistance, which has, of course, generated a whole new group of eligible workers. We're talking teachers' assistants, we're talking nurses, who make a many ways livable wage, but not livable when it comes to childcare. So with that expanded eligibility and the investment in funds last year into childcare, we saw, a spike in demand, and the funds that were appropriated last year only lasted about 6 months. So by July of 2024, they had filled all of the available slots, and started creating a wait list. And as of December of this year, there were 10,000 kids on that wait list. Families who were eligible for the subsidy voucher, but who couldn't get it because of the lack of budget support. So the biggest priority with bills from Mamie Locke in the Senate and David Bouleva in the House was to clear the wait list and then study the need to update the formula to meet future demand. We were really hopeful about those bills. That was HB 2538 and SB 756. They died in the Senate Finance and Appropriations. So HB 2538, it made it all the way through the House. It passed the House, but then failed in Senate Appropriations. And then Senator Locke's bill failed in Senate Appropriations. And what we were told was that in the horse trading of what gets funded, K-12 education would be the bigger priority this year. And so that pretty much meant that any early childhood failed. The only thing that made it through was $25 million for a public-private pilot initiative that would essentially offer up match to localities who can bring private employers on board. So for private employers that want to invest in early childhood for their workers, they can draw down on a 50% match up to $25 million. So pittances compared to what is needed. It's a real shame that that these bills to clear the wait list didn't pass. Boulevard had also tried for a budget amendment, which did not make it through. So unfortunately, what this means for Virginia's families is that, you know, the wait list will grow. Tens of thousands of children who need early childhood care, and families who, would qualify for subsidy participation, are not going to be able to access that support. And given the rate of access, once you get on the wait list, it could be months before you actually get access to the benefit, which families drop off. They either find alternate means or parents drop out of the workforce, which is what they're seeing happening. And again, the professions that you see qualifying are, critical essential worker categories. Something like 35% work in healthcare who access these kinds of benefits. So it's a real it's a real doozy that we haven't solved for childcare, because it affects so many other aspects. But it's not all doom and gloom. We're hoping that and this is what we hear from elected officials, it being an election year, people have been wary to make sort of longer term investments. They wanted one-off investments like this pilot program. And there's real hope that with a new administration next year, we'll be able to make the kinds of significant investments that are needed in early care, but also in family medical leave, and other family supporting policies and programs that the league is in favor of. So that's kind of my update. Not great this year, hopeful for the next. And we'll just keep on fighting.
Okay, well, that's fun. But I know you're up against it. You're up against it. And we appreciate all the work you do with your committee. We're moving to environment now. Carolyn, there you are. Thank you.
Good morning. I do not want to repeat a bunch of bill numbers because I'll get them wrong. So, there's a document in the Google Drive of documents, and you can consult that at your leisure. First, I want to point out that we actually had a good year for the environment. Bills in 3 areas that have been brought year after year look like we're going to get somewhere, assuming the governor doesn't veto them. Sorry. Some focus on funding for flooding. One bill has passed. 2 more are in a conference committee. In the area of environmental justice, which we've got a brand new position, Shelley Simons, who's brought this bill for years, to get localities to consider it in their comp plans, was joined this year by Senator Bagby, and both bills passed. And she also had a bill to address wetlands that have been, slowly disappearing with development, and that passed. These are all things that have been coming to the General Assembly for several years, so really pleased about that. And then we come to data centers. There were an incredible amount of bills coming at the issues from every direction. Tried to kind of divide them up into, were they about energy demand? Were they about the siting, because a data center is not a good neighbor for a residential area, and so on and so forth. The only thing that I know of that environment related that's actually in the budget is Delegate Kilgore wants to extend the tax break for data centers. And given that the General Assembly is in hand-wringing mode over the fate of the Virginia economy, I think this might be a good year to kill that off. So if you have a conferee representing you, you might say, you know, those data centers don't need extra money. They're making hand over fist already, crying out loud. They're not going to go anywhere. We've got the cables, and we've got Washington, D.C. We have, as the real estate people put it, location, location, location. We don't need to give them money too. Other than that, bills were combined, bills were watered down. Everything's out of committee now, thank goodness, that's going to come out. There were a lot of substitutes that didn't help. But there are bills out there, and you'll find a list of them on the document I mentioned. So I think trends that we've observed this year is that the legislators know they've got to deal with this, and they know it's a popular subject with their constituents, but it's tied to energy, and that scares the heck out of them, because energy bills always scare the heck out of them. And then we had that moment when Senator Stanley said what nobody says, which is that clean energy is really a fight between Northern Virginia and South and Southwest Virginia, where the energy would actually come from. Yeah, it's like, you want to build the data centers and you want all the revenue from them, and you want us to spoil our landscape with all of these solar panels. So somehow or other, we've got to find ways to address that resentment. I think we're going to see in the coming year a return of concern about water quality and microplastics. That's come up for several years and it doesn't go anywhere. But they did get concerned about PFAS last year, so maybe we'll finally get that. We've got to keep up a focus on clean energy and its relation to data centers, because they have, despite all the bills, they haven't really dealt with that. And next year, we've got to bring back Reggie. Thank you.
Very true, very true. Now, before I go to Christine Payne, I'm going to put you on the spot because I think you started a controversy here. Before we started, you said the SAVE Act passed the House. Now we're getting conflicting information that it did not pass the House. So I'm doing some research. Where did you hear that it passed the House? The U.S.
Me?
House. Yeah.
So it's on the gov.gov page.
Okay. All right. I'll look it up because I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. All right. Anyway,
Congress.gov HR 22.
There you go.
That's the link I posted, Joan.
Yeah.
So you're saying it did not pass.
It passed last year, which was a different Congress. It's been reintroduced this year into the 119th and has not passed. They're on recess this week.
Okay, so that's, it did not pass this year.
Thank you, Peggy, but the link that I had, and I'll try to find it and share it, has highlighted passed in black from last night.
Okay,
But-
well, we'll get to the bottom of this. We'll
Yeah,
get to the.
yeah, we could do that offline. But
All
thank,
right.
yeah, I'll go back and take a look as
I'll
well.
research it too. So now back to Virginia. You are going to give us an update on the domestic and gun violence bills. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Hi, good morning, everybody. Okay, I'll put my Connecticut speech, rapid fire speech on so that we can get through this fast. We've got a domestic and gun violence prevention majority in both the House and the Senate, so we fared relatively well this General Assembly cycle. You can get the whole list of all the bills in the Google Drive. Thanks to Andy Goddard, who always keeps this tracking up to date. So I'm going to break it down by league priorities, and one of our priorities is reducing gun deaths in children and teens. We know that for the past 5 years, firearms have been the leading cause of death, outpacing motor vehicle accidents, cancer, drownings, and we can do better in that regard by reducing access to firearms. So Senator Boysko sponsored her SB 1134, which is a bill that requires locking firearms and ammunition up in residents where children, teens, and other prohibited persons are present. That bill has a House companion, which is HB 1678. No, I'm sorry. I take that back. Senator Boysko's bill stands alone. It has passed both the House and the Senate, and it's on its way to the governor's desk. SB 1048, which is Senator Pekarsky's bill. I'm sorry, I haven't had enough coffee. And Delegate Cohen's companion bill, HB 1678. Those require school boards to create policies notifying parents of the importance of locking up firearms. Last year, this bill did not survive the governor's pen. So we've expanded it this year, and we are creating the conversation about protecting children from lethal means. So we've expanded this to include prescription drugs. We're hoping that the governor's going to take a bite out of this apple because it just highlights the importance of protecting children from lethal means in the homes, including firearms and prescription drugs. So hopefully that's going to survive. Delegate Fagans has a much more comprehensive safe storage bill. That's HB 1597. That incorporates some language from Delegate Loeffler. It's a little bit more complicated. You can read through the whole bill, but that also has survived, and it's on its way to the governor's desk. That includes storing your firearms safely in other areas, like in a car. We hope that that passes, but we'll take a look. We'll see. So opponents of safe storage measures argue that we can't legislate people's behaviors, but we know that in the public health space that we do. We've legislated change in behaviors with tobacco use in public spaces and with mandating car seats for children and infants. So we can do this by changing behavior. It's just a matter of the will of our governor. So when we talk about assault style firearms, since 1990, the league has supported mandating bans on assault style weapons. Senator Deeds carried his bill this year again, 1181, which prohibits the purchase, possession, and sale and transfer of assault style weapons. That conformed to Delegate Helmer's HB 1607, and that has passed both the House and the Senate. That's also on the way to the governor's desk. Ghost guns, we've talked about ghost guns in the past. They are impossible to trace. easy to assemble, and they have no place in Virginia's communities. They add to the surplus of illegal firearms on our streets. Senator Ebbins' Senate Bill 881 has passed. This prohibits the manufacturing, possession, and storage of these types of firearms. That's going off to the governor's desk as well. Hospitals and healthcare centers that provide mental health services, they are considered sensitive spaces as a historical matter. And, you know, a lot of opponents to these bills like to get back to the original intent of the Constitution. So when we talk about hospitals, way back when they were asylums and not hospitals, firearms were prohibited in those spaces. So we're hoping that fast forward to the 21st century, we can designate these spaces as firearm-free zones. We know that healthcare workers have 5 times more likely the risk of experiencing workplace violence than other professions, and the presence of firearms increases this risk. Delegate Hernandez Bill HB 1977 and the companion bill by Senator Williams Graves, SB 1110, those have both passed the House and the Senate, and they require a ban on all firearms in these types of settings. We're hoping that perhaps that will be spared the governor's pen. The League advocates for increasing protections for victims of intimate partner violence. We know that domestic violence is not limited to the marital relations, but it expands many types of intimate relationships. It affects both women and men. And we'd like to expand the definition of intimate partner and close the boyfriend loophole. We've been working on this for years as well. Virginia is one of only 4 states where dating partners don't qualify for orders of protection in cases of intimate partner violence. And we also know that the greatest predictor of future violence is a history of past violence. So Delegate McClure's HB 1869 closes the boyfriend loophole, and it also extends prohibitions to own firearms for offenders of certain violent misdemeanor crimes. That's important because right now the backlash is, oh, if I only committed a misdemeanor, even in the context of domestic abuse, I should still be able to have my firearms. So watch for Delegate McClure's bill. That is identical to Senator Perry's bill, SB 883. That is slowly making its way. It has not been voted on the House floor yet, but watch for that to come out early next week. We don't have many days left. So that kind of goes through many of our priorities. Like I said, I dropped my email and my cell phone number in the chat. You can reach out to me anytime. I'll do my best to address domestic violence issues, which is less of a thing for me, although it's very important, but gun violence has sort of been my space for a long time. The last thing I'm going to mention is one substantial piece of legislation, SB 1736. This is sponsored by Delegate Cia Price, and it establishes the Virginia Center for Firearm Violence Prevention. With the problem at the federal level, where we've closed the White House Center for Gun Violence Prevention, states are taking the reins. We've got more than a dozen states now that are sponsoring these types of bills. Excuse me. Gun violence research was hogtied for about 22 years on the federal level because of the Dickey Amendment that's been attached to appropriations for infinitum. We've loosened these restrictions and we've opened up some research, and now we're going to see that roll back significantly with this administration. So see, a prices bill is really important. It establishes our center. We can use this as a clearinghouse for research, policy development, and education. And let's hope that that passes. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture. Last year, the governor vetoed a record number of bills, including virtually all of the firearm violence prevention and domestic violence prevention bills. We can put the pressure on him to hopefully spare a few. He can even save face by just not signing the bills. When you have a bill that goes on the governor's desk, which he ignores, it does go into law in Virginia. So, you know, I mean, if he doesn't want to attach his name to something, he could just let it sit. So anybody who is interested in advocating in that space and needs some wording or a little coaching on what to say, please reach out to me. I think next year, I think it was Maria that suggested that this was an election year, and we do have the opportunity next year to change the landscape on the state level, and that'll be next year's fight or this year's fight later.
Okay.
That's all.
All right, thank you. And now for our physical health task force, Carol Cutler.
Hi, I'm Carol Cutler. My name is listed as Luke because he's the person who has the account that my Zoom is in. And I tried to change my name and I couldn't find out how to change my name on this. But
No
I'm
worries.
for Stephanie Lowenhop, who is traveling in Southeast Asia. And this relates to some of the bills pertaining to healthcare. And so the first one is the Medicaid budget amendments for Cover All Kids, emerging Medicaid coverage or emergency Medicaid coverage, continuous Medicaid coverage for up to 6 years old. None of those made it into the budget. The next item is the Medicaid expansion that is currently being negotiated. Senator Deeds is an advocate for this bill, and this is out of concern for the federal. 90% of the funds for this Medicaid bill come from the federal government. So this bill is it's Budget Amendment 288, number 7S, I believe it is to try to protect the funds for Virginia residents. The third thing to report is the Prescription Affordability Board bill amendment, and this has passed the House and is under Senate review. It was vetoed last year. So this has to do with protecting citizens from the high cost of prescription drugs, and a board would review and report to the General Assembly some of these costs. So those are the highlights of Stephanie's report on the healthcare, Medicare, physical healthcare bills.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I changed your name, so now we know who you are.
Well, I want to talk to you about how you did that.
I will tell you. Okay. Thank you. All right, now we're going to go to Sarah Dalton, who will have a report from the Reproductive Health Group. And it seems that something just passed the Senate. The right to contraception passed the Senate just as we were speaking. So Sarah, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to begin and end my report with good news. I'll be talking about the status of reproductive health bills that we have been following. The first good news is that the constitutional amendment for reproductive freedom, HJ1 and SJ 247, passed in both the House and the Senate. It was along party lines. This is really important legislation that cannot be vetoed by the governor, but does have to pass in the General Assembly with the same wording next year, as we all know. So the election this fall is critical, the House of Delegates elections. But this amendment provides for the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the ability to make and carry out decisions relating to one's own prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, abortion care, mismanagement, miscarriage management and fertility care. So it's expansive and inclusive and protective. An unconscious bias bill did pass in both the House and Senate, and this would require unconscious bias and cultural competency training for healthcare professionals as part of their renewal of license. Senator Favola's consumer protection bill for reproductive or sexual health information passed both chambers, and this is a really excellent piece of legislation that protects us in many ways from whether we're seeking information about reproductive health care. It covers that information. It would cover information about surgeries, procedures, attempts to buy contraceptives, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really an excellent piece of legislation. Also passed was the health insurance for contraceptive drugs and devices. This bill is often called the Contraception Equity Act, and that has passed the Senate on party lines, but it did get some bipartisan support in the House. So that's good news. I should say, though, that the companion bill for that was read in the Senate yesterday, but passed by for the day. But I expect that will get through the Senate. The governor vetoed this legislation last year, so we have to keep that in mind. And I should note, the information on all these bills is in the drive, and I submitted my report to Joan yesterday when some of the bills were still being heard on the Senate floor. So I've indicated that in the notes that you will see. And actually, all of them did get through the Senate except the HB 2371, the health insurance for contraceptive drugs, and that was passed by for the day, but I expect that it will get through. And then the next bill, which is really important, is Senator Hashmi's right to contraception that has passed both the House and the Senate on party line votes. Sadly, the governor vetoed that one last year, so we'll see what he does this year. 3 maternal health bills have now passed both the House and the Senate. So those are bills that we were supporting. One would create a maternal health data task force. Another establishes a public postpartum depression awareness program. And the third establishes a commission on women's health as a permanent commission in the legislative branch of government. And I'm sorry to say that 2 really excellent bills look like they're not going to get through. They are extradition bills, which we really need. One is Senator Favola's SB 743, which would protect from extradition providers and recipients of reproductive health care and those who assist. It did pass the Senate on party lines, but it has not gotten through the House yet. I'm hopeful, but it's not looking good. And the other one was Senate Bill 1098, Senator Hashmi's bill, which would provide the same protections for protected health care in Virginia. It started out as gender affirming care and reproductive health care, but it was changed to protected health care. It has passed the Senate with substitute, but it's gotten stalled in the House. And there was one other bill that we supported that failed, and that was presumptive eligibility for medical assistance for pregnant people who would have then been given immediate access to prenatal care. There were 2 bills that we were glad that failed. There were 2 abortion born alive bills again this year, and they didn't even get out of committees. So my final bit of good news is that the League of Women Voters of Virginia is now a member of Virginians for Reproductive Freedom, which is a coalition of 19 state and national organizations that represent healthcare providers, patient advocates, and reproductive justice workers. The main goal of this coalition is the passage and implementation of the Constitutional Amendment for Reproductive Freedom. So although the General Assembly is about to end and the governor may veto some of our bills and will likely veto some of our bills. The League's efforts for reproductive freedom and to pass this constitutional amendment will continue through our active involvement with this coalition. And as we know, the governor can't veto the constitutional amendment. So we had some good news and we're hopeful for next year. That's about it.
Great, thank you. Carolyn, it's a state group. Okay. And last but certainly not least, with the bulk of our bills being voting for obvious reasons, I'm going to call on Lisa Coteen-Burchick for the voting and elections issue group update.
Thank you, Joan, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us all, and this has been a fascinating update for everyone on what's going on. I'll give you a current status report on voting and elections bills that we support and have survived so far. I'm limiting it to those because we followed approximately 90 bills we were tracking this session. And it's really, we have groups of people who are tracking bills, and so that's very helpful, but it's really much more than we could possibly talk about now. I would take the entire period to do that. So I'm just going to highlight a few of them. We do have a status report in the drive for you to look at. And some of the things I'm going to say, I will point out some changes to update further. The status report was prepared yesterday, and we hadn't heard from the Senate Finance Committee the prior day. We hadn't heard those results, and as people have mentioned already, Senate Finance is a place where bills can go to die, but there were a couple of surprises where the bills did in fact pop out and land on the floor of that particular body. So let me start first with our major priority, which was the right to vote amendment. And HJ2, Bennett Parker's bill in the House, and Senator Locke's SJ 248 in the Senate have already passed both houses. So they are cleared for the first reference, and they will be brought up again after the election in the next General Assembly session next year. And what this constitutional amendment requires is to change the Constitution, which currently limits voting eligibility and to those who are over 18, those who have not been convicted of a felony, and those who have not been adjudicated as mentally incompetent. The amendment would not mention the 18-year-old age limit, but would automatically restore the rights of those who have been released from incarceration after a felony conviction, and those who have been adjudicated as mentally incompetent, but do have the capacity to understand the act of voting. Those two classes of people would be allowed to join the voter list and cast their ballots. Similarly, and in relation to that, there is one bill that passed the House and the Senate, and that is HB 2746, Delegate Trans Bill, that would require a court, when it is adjudicating mental competence for guardianship purposes, to make a specific determination whether or not the individual does have the mental capacity to understand the act of voting. Currently, we have encountered ourselves, and there are many, many reports of judges simply granting guardianship to people and not taking into account whether or not the person has the mental capacity to vote. And there are people who have been disenfranchised because of that, or could vote, want to vote, and are unable to for that reason. And so this would require a judge to look at this carefully and make that determination. Voter list maintenance is a key issue. We're talking about the SAVE Act that would disenfranchise millions of Americans. I think at least 20 million Americans is one estimate. But there have been much smaller systematic voter purges here in the Commonwealth, and we oppose those. We are in fact bringing a lawsuit, but there are several bills that would help to resolve this situation. One of them is HB 2276. Delegate Price's bill would put in very specific requirements for what needs to be considered in order to remove someone from the voter rolls. You can't cancel their voter registration without meeting certain criteria. That bill did emerge from Senate Finance after having passed the House previously and is now in second reading in the Senate. HB 1657 and SB 813 are companion bills that have passed both of their houses, and they provide for a 90-day quiet period, which federal law has for federal elections, and this would be for state elections. And what that means is that for 90 days prior to an election, there cannot be any of these systematic programmatic voter purges. Yes, individuals who are known to have moved or known to have died or determined to be ineligible to vote on the basis of their citizenship, they can be removed from the voter rolls, but purges would not be permitted. These bills also require that currently someone who is going to be canceled from the voter rolls receives a notice of their pending cancellation from their local registrar, but the notice must be responded to and received by the registrar within 14 days from the date the notice is mailed. And that is a simply inadequate time period given the mail system. Therefore, these bills would double that period and would allow the response to the notice to be in 28 days. So those bills have passed and are on their way to the governor's desk. We shall see. Other bills that are companion bills would do a really great service to everyone who is involved in voting, whether they're voters or election officials. And this requirement would be they call it closing the books, which is when the voter registration shuts down. And currently it's 21 days before an election. The bills would change it to 10 days before the election, so that people could register up until 10 days before an election. And during that time, they could vote early, either in person, by mail. And that is a real boon. The same-day voter registration process, which is a fail-safe, would not kick in until that 10th day before the election. And a big burden there is that anyone who registers same day can only vote provisionally. And that requires research by the registrars and adjudication by the electoral boards. And this would cut that at least to some extent. So those bills we supported strongly, and they have been overwhelmingly supported in bipartisan form. A bill involving election administration, another one, would simply allow any properly postmarked ballot mailed in time that arrives not by noon on the third day after the election, but by 5 p.m. that day to be counted. In Arlington, 200 ballots, more or less, were not counted, even though they were properly postmarked. The patron is Senator Favola, who represents Arlington, and this bill is gliding through as well. And it was read the second time yesterday. I did not see it on the calendar for today, however. Skipping ahead a bit, we normally do not support bills that are very local in nature. At the request of the Southampton Roads League, we did support and do support a bill to allow Virginia Beach pretty much specifically, even though it's not named, to go toward or to work toward its single member district election approach for its local council. Campaign finance. We had bills were doing much better this year than in the past. And there are some bills that are still alive. A few were passed by indefinitely just yesterday, unfortunately. We have some bills on artificial manipulation of campaign materials. We're really looking at artificial intelligence, which can alter voice, alter image, alter a lot of things, but the bills go beyond that to allow sort of old-fashioned photoshopping and that type of thing. The House Bill HB 2479 is on the unfinished business today in the Senate. It passed the House and it did pass the Senate, but it is still undergoing some work. And there will have to be some resolution between it and the Senate bill, which differs somewhat. The Senate bill is SB 775. We liked the language used for artificial intelligence in the Senate bill, but it is very weak now because the only penalty is a $50 civil penalty for failing to disclose that the advertising contains this manipulated information. Both bills require disclosure that that there was some sort of electronic or other types of manipulation of the material in an advertisement with a banner across the face of it. But the consequences will probably end up being minimal, even if that survives. The House bill has a $25,000 fine, so that might be the unfinished business that's going on, but we don't know for sure. As far as firming up requirements of enforcement, there's an appeals process proposed by SB 945. That bill has passed the Senate. It's on the House floor and is moving ahead. There is some light, we hope, regarding the prohibition of personal use of campaign funds. I mean, it's unbelievable in Virginia. Candidates can use campaign funds for their personal use. And there are similar bills passed in both houses. And the House bill, originally House Bill HB 2165, is on third reading. It was passed by for the day yesterday. The Senate bill SB 1002 is on third reading in the House, and it is on the uncontested calendar, so we expect that one to pass. Sadly, a public financing option bill passed by indefinitely in Senate Finance just yesterday. Also passed by indefinitely in Senate Finance on, not yesterday, but on Monday. It was a bill that would have created a searchable campaign finance information database. So those bills did not go through. The final bill that I would mention is a ranked choice voting bill. The substitute switched it to a bill from last year that merely addresses the process for ranked choice voting, all the procedures that need to be followed. And that bill was read the second time in the House, but it is not on today's calendar, unfortunately. And I'm sorry, in the Senate. It passed the House and it is in the Senate now. So we did not, our last priority is national popular vote, and there were no bills this year. So that concludes the Voting and Elections Issues Group update. You might take a look at the document in the drive, which has a more fulsome explanation. But I've done some updating today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks to everybody. And I want to thank all of our issue group people, because you see the tremendous amount of work that they do. And we've dropped into chat. You know, if you don't need to be an expert time, or you want to learn about a topic, join an issue group because we certainly can use all the help we can get. I also want to thank everybody who has come every week, whether in person or hybrid or virtual. We don't have to worry about getting thrown out of a room today, so I can take a few more seconds to thank everybody who's come and your interest in this. We normally have, upwards of 80, sometimes 100 people on these calls, plus they go up on our YouTube page and our website so that people can refer to them. And as for the SAVE Act, there's a good reason why we had this controversy. It did not pass the House, but the good news is that all this controversy has brought attention to it. It is a very dangerous bill. You need to contact your House people. It looks like, and I haven't been able to do any outside research during this meeting, of course, but it looks like it's scheduled to come up in the House on February 24th. So we still have time. If you've not gotten any, or if you've not clicked on any of the league, and I've gotten at least 5 requests to go to Stop the SAVE Act, please do that now. It looks like if they do pass it on February 24th, they'll probably try to put it through the budget reconciliation in the Senate to get it so it does override the filibuster. That did not work last year, but goodness knows this year. So get your friends, get your family, get everybody you know, particularly if you are in areas where you have people who might vote for it, and tell other people in other states. Yeah, there's the 5 app call. There's also Lead in Action. If you have Lead in Action, which is the Lead app, you can send the alert out to all your family and friends. But I want to thank everybody again. We will be continuing to watch the amendments, and I thank all of you. And if you are in the path of snow, even though I'm mad at you for stealing my snow, be safe. And particularly if you are in the area of the floods, certainly be safe, and we wish you all the best. So take care. Thank you all. Go forth and be fabulous. Bye-bye.